Okay.
take off
Okay.
or whatever. So yeah, use that one.
All right, sounds good. All right.
Usually short.
Go ahead and mute 5.
Jimmy Doolittle. Good evening. I wouldn't be anywhere else either. Although tomorrow night, or Friday night, you need to be here too. You're in Theater in the Woods. If you're confused or lost, you found the right place. We wouldn't be anywhere without our sponsor, M&M's. Wave at the M&M man when you leave the theater. And you would not hear my ramblings if it wasn't for the beautiful Bose equipment. It's surprising when equipment can make me sound something other than Donald Duck. We have 4 new volunteer winners tonight. Sue Beer from the Fab Shop, Ann Reed from Admissions, Northgate, Main North, Charlotte Parker from Home Built, and Kathy Jackson from Admissions. Ooh, they picked another one. Cindy Lopez from the Volunteer Center. Just in case somebody was taking a shower and did not want to be here or didn't make the trip, we are streaming every night HD, which the screens are also, on the EAA website. Okay? I always want to go further in this introduction because I'm proud to call him a friend. My friend, David Hartman.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay.
Thanks, sir. Yeah. Hi. Evening, everybody. Before we start the program, we have a special treat, a special guest. Please welcome the Honorable Dr. Heather Wilson. She is the Secretary of the United States Air Force. Thank you, ma'am.
On behalf of the 660,000 members of the United States Air Force, our airmen wanted to welcome you to tonight's event. And it's very special in our heritage. The Doolittle Raiders took off from the USS Hornet in the Pacific Ocean to strike the mainland of Japan 4 months after the United States survived Pearl Harbor. We brought the fight to the enemy, and we're doing that every day, again, on behalf of the citizens of the United States, protecting the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So I wanted to welcome you to tonight's event and welcome to the families and the descendants of the Doolittle Raiders.
Yeah. See if we can crank up the... Just up and walked out. I mean, thank you, Madam Secretary. Just to give a heads up about the evening, we're going to have our live discussion here. We're going to start with a 6-minute preamble video, then have our live conversation. Then we're going to show a 30-minute part of a documentary about Dick Cole's life, which is wonderful. And then at 7:30, 14 B-25s are going to engine start and taxi to do the commemorative flight honoring the Doolittle Tokyo raid. Just so you know, that will happen. The engine starts at 7:30. But we have set up camera and sound over there, so you'll be able to see and hear that on the jumbo screens here. So that's the evening. So let's start. Roll a video, please. Enjoy the Tokyo Doolittle Raider gang. Thanks.
I was assigned to the ferry command set up at Dallas, Texas. And when I got to Dallas, I was reassigned to the Douglas plant at Tulsa, Oklahoma as a ferry control officer. My job was to turn the paperwork over to the incoming crews in some respects, it was pretty good because some of the pretty young ladies were flying airplanes. I was supposed to test up a B-24. I went out to the airplane and was making a walk around, and this young lady came up on a bicycle. And she said, I want to fly in a big airplane. I'm taking flying lessons to be a WASP at Spartan, which was across the field. And I said, well, you can't do that because we can't take people on test top. Besides, there's no parachute. I got in the airplane, and the co-pilot came, and so did the crew chief. So we fired up and took off. At about 12,000 feet, who came up into the cockpit area but this young lady. So we had to scrub the mission. And we got on the ground, and I was filling out the form on, and the co-pilot that took out a match cover thing says, here, gave it to her and said, put the telephone number on here. She did, wrote it out, and gave it to me.
It was a typically beautiful Honolulu morning, Sunday, December 7, 1941. Some were on their way to church, others sleeping off Saturday night fun, while the military and civilians enjoyed their quiet, comfortable, complacent dawn. 6 Japanese aircraft carriers were steaming to within flying range of Pearl Harbor and Ford Field. At exactly 7:48 a.m., the first of 353 Japanese planes started dropping bombs on the bulk of our country's Pacific Fleet, which was mostly lined up, tied up, still in the water, in the tiny harbor, sitting ducks. 9 minutes later, at 7:57 that awful morning, a radio message crackled across the island. Quote, air raid, Pearl Harbor, this is not a drill. In the stunning 2-hour surprise attack by Japanese aircraft and submarines, 18 ships were sunk or damaged. Most of nearly 300 Navy, Marine, and Air Corps planes were decimated where they sat on tarmacs. Only a handful of American military aircraft got off the ground. 29 Japanese planes were shot down that morning. More than 2,400 of our Marines, sailors, soldiers, and civilians died. Nearly 1,200 were wounded. The world would never be the same. In a speech to Congress and the country the next day, President Roosevelt, declaring war on Japan, referred to the previous day of the attack, quote, a date that will live in infamy.
A state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Admiral Yamamoto, the Japanese fleet commander who masterminded the attack, said, quote, I fear all we have done today is to awaken a great sleeping giant and fill him with terrible resolve, unquote. Little did he know. Fortunately, 75 years later, our countries are friends. The Japanese attack was intended to not only destroy much of our Pacific Fleet, but our morale as well. Roosevelt responded by pressing our military leaders to strike the Japanese homeland as soon as possible to send a message that attacking America was a big mistake. On April 18, 1942, just 4 months later, 80 American airmen, led by Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, in 16 B-25 medium bombers, successfully attacked many targets in Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Dick Cole. You're all standing up. Thank you. Also joining us, one of Jimmy and Joe Doolittle's granddaughters. Her name is Jonna Doolittle. She has written a wonderful afterburner biography about her grandparents, Jonna Doolittle Hoppus. Jonna? And a grandson of Jimmy and Joe Doolittle. He's an Air Force 30 years active duty colonel, retired aviator, 200 missions in A-1 Sky Raiders when he beat me to it. So you can see, and he has to listen to this now. Over 200 missions in the A-1 Sky Raider, has over 12,000 hours as a pilot. He was a multi-tour test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base for many years and a former commandant of the test pilot school at Edwards Flight Test Center. And this is Jimmy Doolittle III. So you heard in the video about the president speaking to the country after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. It was just 3 weeks later, on December 21st, when he sat down with the military leadership and said, the United States has got to bomb Japan and do it soon and do it in secret. Pretty tall challenge at the time. There was one bomb group, the 17th, stationed and based up in Pendleton, Oregon, that already had B-25s, and it was decided then that that was the aircraft would be the only one possible that could get off an aircraft carrier. So, Dick, there you were as a co-pilot, right, in the bomb group up in Pendleton, Oregon, flying anti-submarine stuff in the Pacific. But very soon there were new orders, and the whole bomb group was ordered back to South Carolina.
Yeah.
What did they tell you the reason was to go back to South Carolina?
Well, the fellow, we were ordered back there to do a little training and then go to Africa.
Hold on just a second, we'll get your mic around here. No. Go ahead, try now. Yeah, so they told you what when you were in South Carolina?
South Carolina, and do some training there. And then we were headed for Africa, North Africa.
For Africa?
Yeah.
But at some point, you were transferred down to what is now Eglin Air Force Base.
Yeah.
When did you know that you were not going to Africa, that there was something else that they had in mind?
I don't remember the exact date, but it was probably after 2 weeks or 3 weeks that we had arrived at Columbia.
Right.
Yeah.
Did they say anything to you about a volunteer mission?
They passed the word. The way our crew got the word was we had to read the ops board every day, and it had said they wanted for a dangerous mission, and you had to put your name there. The pilot that I was screwed up into Columbia with put his name up there too, and we were going as a crew.
So everybody signed up?
Yeah.
Nobody walked away even though it was a volunteer deal?
Well, it passed the word by mouth, and the whole group, including the group commander, volunteered.
Now, at some point, very soon after that, they moved you to what's now Eglin Air Force Base. What did you do down there at Eglin? What was the point of being there?
Well, while we were at Eglin, the main training was the Navy had sent a young Lieutenant Henry Miller from Pensacola up to train us in how to make a carrier takeoff. And he had never seen a B-25 before. But he was.
Had you ever seen an aircraft carrier before?
That's right.
What was
Anyway,
your
a very
reaction
good
to that?
instructor.
When they said you're going to take off an aircraft carrier?
Yeah.
What was your reaction?
No way. But he changed our mind.
He did.
Yeah.
So what did they do to the airplanes, and what was your training when you were there to learn how to do that?
Well, Colonel Doolittle wanted to have everybody get 50 hours of training. But there were problems with the gas tanks up in Minnesota and a lot of flips around here. And so it ended up, I think we ended up with about 35 hours. The navigators were given additional training in celestial navigation, and the gunners were given gunner training. We made a couple of long distance flights to lower Florida and to Houston for gas consumption and
Low level stuff?
Two of them were daytime and one was at night.
What did they do to start modifying the airplanes to make them lighter?
First off, they took out the bomb sight since we were going to go low level.
Norden bomb sight?
And then they took out the lower turret and put in a gas tank. They put a bladder tank over the bombs in the bomb bay. And then they put bladder tanks on top of the only way you could go from the front to back in the B-25, all over the bottom of the bay. And they had put 10 5-gallon cans of fuel in the rear where the gunner could dump into the gas tank and we could use it up. He would.
So the idea, after they used up these small cans of gas, what would they do to the cans to get rid of them? How did they do that?
Yeah, he chopped a hole in it and threw it out. It sunk.
So they'd sink in the ocean. They wouldn't be a trail behind the B-25s from the carrier. Anything else they did to make the planes lighter?
Well, they took out all the main communication equipment, and we ended up with the command set, which I think only had a range of about 45 miles. So when it came time and we took off, the Navy held up a heads-up board. I looked down and thought, well, we've just separated ourselves from civilization.
So in the barracks, who was in the barracks? Who was in the barracks at Eglin? Just your crews?
Yeah.
Were in the barracks?
Yeah. We were POWs. We couldn't get off the base.
So at this point, you still didn't know what was going to happen.
No.
At what point did you meet Colonel Doolittle? When did he come into the picture personally?
I can't remember the date, but he came in on the same day, and this all happened in about an hour. In the meantime, the pilot that I was crewed up with became ill. So that left us without a pilot. I had been checked out in the B-25, but I did not have the confidence to try something. I had no carrier takeoff practice. So anyway, I lost my train of thought.
No, well, General Doolittle, when Doolittle came in.
In the meantime, he came in. And I had gone to see Ski York, who was the operations officer. And he looked over his record and said, the old man is coming in today, and I'll crew you up with him. And if you do okay, you got yourself a pilot.
Now, at that point, did you know who Jimmy Doolittle was at that point?
Yes, I did. He was in my scrapbook as an idol for when I was a younger fellow.
Well, you grew up in Dayton,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And
Did you ever go down to McCook Field and see them fly?
there was Army's first test base, which was McCook Field. It was within bicycle riding of where I lived. So I spent a lot of time over there.
So what was your thinking when you found out you were going to be sitting right seat to Jimmy Doolittle? What went through your head?
Yeah, well, to put it bluntly, I was in a state of awe on the whole trip. So.
The whole trip?
Yes.
So do you recall your first flight with him in the left seat?
Yes, he came in, and all he did was take the pilot seat that I had arrived there with.
Right.
And by 3 o'clock, we were on the way to South Florida with him, just our crew.
Right.
He went down to someplace right around Miami to have some kind of a little conference with somebody. The next morning, we were on our way to Bowling Field in Washington, and after that, to Wright-Patterson, and then back down to Egland. So we had, he was very gracious with letting me fly straight and level.
So you finished. Jonna, were you going to?
I'm just getting there.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks. Do you recall what it was like trying to get the airplane? I mean, they'd marked the runway like a carrier deck. Do you recall what it felt like to fly the airplane, to try to get it off the ground before you got to the end of the, carrier line?
Lieutenant Miller flew with everybody, and what he did really was get the Army pilots to bring the control back to the least line of resistance, which was B0, to get the maximum amount of thrust.
Right.
Because at that time, if you had an engine cough or go off, well, that was the end of it. Yeah.
The end. Literally, yeah. Right. Now, then you're transferred out to McClellan Air Force Base in California. You arrived there, 16 airplanes, right, and all your crews and ground crews. So what happened there in maintenance at Sacramento?
Well, every base had what they called a transit crew, which were maintenance people. And their orders were to find out when the airplane was going to leave and to check it out and have it ready for the crews that were going to fly it. Unbeknownst to those people, they didn't get the word that the tech reps back at Egland had set the carburetors at a 0 degree heading, or not a heading, but consumption, and so forth. And they were not to be touched, but the one crew did not either ignored it or they forgot about it or didn't know it at all. And this was what caused a little problem.
So what was the problem? How did they're tinkering with the engines? What did it do to the engines?
Well, it made gas consumption back to normal, which we didn't want. We wanted to be under that. And I've always thought that Ski York had to very high fuel consumption. And this is why he dropped his bombs on Japan and went to Russia.
And landed in Russia later.
Yeah.
But what did Colonel Doolittle say when he found out that these ground crews were messing with your engines?
Well, to say it gracefully, he got a little heated up.
And he straightened it out, right?
And one of the things that happened there was that he had to fill out a clearance. And Jack Helder was next to him. And he filled it out and pushed it away. And the clerk behind the desk said, he's head for a lot of trouble. And Jack says, he sure is.
So within a couple of weeks, they take all the airplanes, you fly the airplanes down to Alameda, right? And they start loading them onto the Hornet. Now, what happened the night before you sailed from Alameda? What were you able to do? You POWs, what were you able to do?
Well, Admiral Housey loaned his gig, I think they called it, and everybody went to San Francisco and ended up in top of the mark. Yeah. And while you were up there, it was still daylight in the afternoon. You could see the B-25 with all the airplanes sitting on across the bay.
So how effective were they at keeping this whole thing a secret? This is only covered about a month or thereabouts, I think, from the time the plan was hatched.
From where I sit, I'd say 100%.
Yeah. So and even from you.
Yeah.
So you leave San Francisco and head out into the Pacific. At what point were you told what the plan was?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't exactly the plan. 2 days at sea, about mid-morning, the PA system came on and said, "Now hear this. Now hear this. This force is bound for Tokyo." And the whole carrier exploded with a bunch of jumping and yelling and clapping and so forth. And maybe after a couple hours, things started to get kind of quiet. People wondering what they'd gotten themselves into. And I was one of them.
So did Colonel Doolittle give you all a chance to still say you wouldn't go?
The way he handled that problem, I would venture to say that had the question come up on the carrier, he would have made the same comment before. He gave everybody a chance to back out with no problems.
And everybody stayed.
And everybody stayed.
Now you're steaming across the Pacific there was, how close did they want the Navy say they could get the carrier to Japan before you would launch?
This is a scuttlebutt words, but we were told that whoever got try it to 500 miles into Japan.
Right.
Other times it was said to be 400, but at any rate it was about 300 miles farther than where we had to take off from.
So you were spotted by,
yeah,
right
yeah,
now.
okay.
Now, what were those picket ships? What were they?
Actually, they were a long distance or fishing boat, but the Japanese had set up a picket arrangement with a high frequency radio at long range in contact with Tokyo all across the entrances to the Tokyo area. Yeah.
So you were spotted early, and then did somebody sink those?
The cruiser Nashville, Colonel Admiral Halsey gave orders to sink it.
But it was too late.
But they had sent a message back to Japan that they had seen two carriers, but they were wanting to wait for a confirmation, which was not going to come because the Nashville had sunk the fishing boat.
So how did that change the plan about when you were going to launch for Japan?
I don't think I can answer that. That was Halsey's job.
Right.
Yeah.
But you launched a day before you originally planned to launch, right?
Yeah,
24 hour, about 24 hours ahead of time.
Yeah.
You were the first plane to launch, right? Now, did you wait for? Was there any kind of join up when the other planes came up in the air? Was there any kind of join up with the other B-25s at all?
No, we flew in a single at a time, and the reason was that we would have used up too much fuel waiting on the others to go. As it was, it took an hour for all the airplanes to be launched.
What altitude did you fly?
We flew the whole mission except the bombing run and the time at the end of the thing at about 200 feet. To go back a little bit, when they took out the Norden bomb site, they took out part of the autopilot. So we had to manhandle it most of the way.
So when you reached Japan, it was daylight.
Yes.
Were people aware of you? People on the ground see you flying over Japan?
We drove. We flew into Japan a little bit north, and the beaches were full of people, either working on boats or just taking sun baths. But playing baseball, we waved at us.
Well, they thought you were Japanese airplanes?
I guess so, which was conceivable because they had a big air raid exercise that morning. And the Japanese had an airplane called the Nell, N-E-L-L, two-tailed, and apparently they thought we were one of those ships.
What was your target?
Our target was the northwest part of Tokyo, the bomber's dream, because he could drop his bombs anyway. We had incendiary bombs, and we were to light up Tokyo for damage purposes and also set up a trail for the other airplanes, particularly the ones that were going to Nagoya and down the chain.
What was What was the process flying in? At what altitude did you drop the incendiaries?
1,500 feet.
1,500? So you popped up?
Yeah.
How'd you do?
Well, pretty hard. Easy target to miss.
So that was all good, yeah?
Yeah.
So then you headed for China.
Yeah.
So how did that go?
We climbed, went back down on the deck, and about 100 miles we turned toward China because we didn't want the Japanese to know we were going to it. We flew a heading as Hank Potter had given us all the way across the China Sea.
Had you picked up? Had you picked up a tailwind at that point?
We may have, but we weren't aware of it. What happened was that Hank Potter passed up a note and said that we were going to run out of fuel 180 miles short of China. At that time, Colonel Doolittle said, well, we better have our ditching procedure down there. And so we got our ditching procedure with vests and so forth. Nobody was interested in ditching because all this time, flying as low as we were, you could see the sharks up on the deck sleeping. But we came to Hank's Point, and we still had fuel. And this is when we thought we had a tailwind.
Wow.
Yeah. And we kept flying, and finally the water changed to kind of muddy and so forth. And at that time we ran into this big front that was over China, and I had to go on instrument. So we climbed to 9,000 feet, stayed there.
Now, there was an airfield where you were supposed to land, but you couldn't land there. Why not?
Yeah. One thing was the weather. The other thing was the airplane carrying a mobile Homer that would have given us a way to land crashed on the way there and killed everybody on board, and so it knocked us out from being able to find or navigate.
So at some point, what, did you run out of gas, or you were expected to?
At that time, Colonel Doolittle tried to, in 4495, tried to raise the Hummer, but no avail. The Chinese heard our engines and thought it was Japanese, so they turned out all the lights. And at that time, Colonel Doolittle climbed about 9,000 feet and said on the interphone that our course of action was to keep Hank's heading at 9,000 feet and fly as long as we could on the gas we had.
So at some point, did Colonel Doolittle call bailout?
He just said that when we get close to where it would be necessary to bail out, we would. And Paul Leonard in the back would go out first, then the navigator and the bombardier, Potter and Fred Rimmer, were in the navigator's cell. They went out, and then I went out.
Did Colonel Doolittle give you a choice about what kind of parachute you wanted to wear?
He gave us a choice, any choice we wanted. I wasn't blessed with any excess bun part of my body, so I chose the seat back with rubber.
So you had a cushion.
Yeah.
So you bailed out into wind, rain, and dark.
Yeah.
How'd that go?
Well, if you discount that anxiety, it went pretty good.
Good. Yeah. Do you remember how hard you pulled on your ripcord?
I do, and I also found out that they don't give you a Purple Heart for self-inflicted injury. I gave myself a black eye.
So where did you land?
I had the best part of the deal was that I did not hit the ground. And the terrain was very dangerous. Lots of cliffs and hills and one it was one worry after another. Somebody asked Churchill about life, and he said life is just one damn thing after another.
Right.
But anyway, I spent the night in the tree.
So what did you do with the parachute? Did you?
I clipped off the excess stuff and made a backpack. And the next morning, when things had cleared up, we all had a compass and were warned to walk west, because if we went east, we'd walk in the hands of the Japanese.
So what did you? At some point, you saw some kind of a building. What was it?
At dusk, I came out on a cliff, and down below was a kind of a semi-military affair, 2 or 3 buildings. So I walked down and was accosted by it had a Chinese national flag flying on it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone down there. He took me to a building. It had nothing in it but a table, and on the table was a sketch on a piece of paper of a 2-tailed airplane with 5 parachutes coming out. I finally got him to take me where he took the gentleman that made the drawing. We walked into this highly camouflaged, kind of a cave building that the way they were illuminated thing was by candle, and there was an overcast inside the building. I could sense somebody on my right. In the meantime, they had brought in a brighter light, and it was Colonel Doolittle. And I said, "Boy, am I glad to see you." And he greeted me and said he was happy I didn't get injured and so forth. In the meantime, they brought in the rest of the crews, and we were all together that night.
When Colonel Doolittle and one of your crewmates went and found the airplane, what was Colonel Doolittle's attitude about what you had accomplished?
Well, Paul Leonard, the crew chief, the Chinese would only take 2 people up to the crash site. So Colonel Doolittle took Paul, and they were looking over what was there. And early on, the Chinese people had been there and cleaned it up pretty good. There's a picture you see with Colonel Doolittle sitting on the wing of the crashed airplane, and he was very dejected. And these are Paul's words, not mine. And Colonel Doolittle said something about they're going to court-martial me because I've lost all the airplanes, and I don't think at that time he was thinking about the fact that he had done what they wanted to do. And the reason that the mission was designed. It was designed, number one, to let the let the Japanese people be told that their island was able to be bombed by air. The military people had kept that secret from them. And the other reason was for the morale of the whole peaceful part of the world. Anyway, Paul told him, and he said, no, he said, you are going to be promoted to a general and be a member of the congressional bombing.
And he said that he thought that he'd get the Medal of Honor. Jana, Jim, so tell that story. What happened? Within a couple of days, he was back in Washington.
He felt very strongly that he shouldn't receive the medal for something like the raid. He just felt that he didn't deserve it. And when he had that discussion with Arnold and Marshall before going to the White House, and of course they outranked him, so he was given the medal. When
the long and the short of it is they said, shut up, Doolittle, you're getting the medal, you're going to go see the president.
But when he accepted it, he accepted it on behalf of every single one of the Raiders. So that medal belongs as much to Dick Cole as it does to Jimmy Doolittle.
Wow. Jimmy, you know, you knew your grandparents really well for years and years. How much did he ever talk about these accomplishments of his, going back to, you know, the first guy to fly under a hood and all the engineering stuff and all this in the radon too? How much did he talk about that stuff?
Sir, he was extremely hesitant to talk about anything about World War II. You know, Dick mentioned riding his bicycle down to McCook Field in Dayton in the mid-20s, and the general would smile and stare off into space and tell wonderful stories about the good days at McCook Field. He loved McCook Field. He loved doing the blind flying experiments with the Sperry's and funded by the Guggenheim Foundation. I think it was in his heart of hearts, he believed that developing the blind flying instruments was certainly the most important accomplishment of his entire life.
Wow. Jana, it's hard, it seems, to talk about your grandfather without talking about your grandmother, named Joe.
That's very true. I mean, I adored my grandfather, but I worshiped my grandmother. You guys called her Mama Joe, right?
Yeah.
And she was. I mean, I grew up with 79 extra uncles, didn't you? So she did the kind thing, right?
Well, Colonel Doolittle was very educational oriented, and all this time that we knew him, and before that, he had in mind that he was going to be an aeronautical engineer. And he was the first one to graduate from MIT with an aeronautical engineer doctor's degree. And while he was doing this, he would copy things down in his handwriting and take them home, and Joe would translate them into the way he could use them. Yeah.
Quizzed him.
Yeah.
How often would you and your flight partners wind up at the Doolittle house, wherever it might be? Did you spend time with the Doolittles?
Most of the time it was at the reunion.
At the reunions?
Because otherwise he was one place, we were another, and we were still in the service. So it would have been very hard to work on any kind of get-together.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Dick Cole, Jonna Doolittle Hoppus, and Jimmy Doolittle.
No. You stay there.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Roll a video, please. Here is more Dick Cole. Watch the screen. The wings of flying things had cast shadows on the sands of these beaches for millennia. But today, this day, the shadows are different. No, these new wings are man-made and engine-powered. They're capable of being controlled in 3 dimensions of freedom by a pilot. These, at last, are the wings of man's ageless dream made real. The people who saw what happened that day understood what they were seeing, what it meant. Well, looking up, Johnny Moore, a young man who lived with his widowed mother in a shack up in Nag's Head Woods, hesitated for a moment and then tore down the beach, shouting, "They done it! They done it! Damned if they ain't flew!" There was only one telegraph key in Kitty Hawk at the time. It belonged to the Weather Bureau. Well, Joe Dasher, who ran the office, was a friend of Orville and Wilbur Wright, so he sent their message home to their father, Bishop Milton Wright, in Dayton, Ohio. Neither Dayton, Ohio, nor the world would ever be the same again.
We lived in a place called Dayton View, which was maybe 4 miles from the center of town. We would either walk or thumb a ride with somebody going into the center of town or ride the streetcar. As a youngster, my father used to take the Poplar Mechanics, and it always had some article in it about aircraft. And when I was old enough, I joined the Airplane Model League of America, which we made these rubber band-powered airplanes.
Richard Eugene Cole was born September 7th, 1915, just 12 years after that first flight at Kitty Hawk. He was born at home at 747 Faulkner Avenue in Dayton, Ohio, literally in the shadow of the Wright brothers' famous wings.
Well, I was fortunate to become part of what I would call a pretty happy family. My mother and father were both even-tempered people and hardworking. Had 3 girls and 3 boys. I just got the bad news the other day where it said the later you are in being born, the less likely you are to be intelligent. I was a lousy student because most of the time I was looking out the window dreaming about either hunting or fishing or something like that. We all went to the local school, which was Jefferson School, grade school. Ended up going to Steele High School, which was one of the high schools in Dayton. Took a couple of courses in mechanics, but as far as geometry, English, algebra, and so forth, I was a very poor student. My father was originally was a fireman on a steam train. Early on, there was an accident, and he lost one eye, so he had to look for another job. And my dad was fortunate enough to get a job with the city of Dayton, and he was able to work all through the Depression. Young people didn't leave the house. They stayed with the family, and it became a family deal, or do about everything you could to save money. Most everybody, if there was land available, kept a garden, and a lot of them were able to make enough in potatoes and corn and so forth, and canned food to last them through the winter. Basically, it was a penny pinching deal for just about everybody. As a kid, I used to ride my bicycle over to McCook and sit on the levee that one of the rivers that ran through Dayton, and sit there and watch them, some of the old timers. One of the biggest things I can remember, there was an airplane called a Barling Bomber that flew in and out of McCook Field. And some of the old pilots like McCready, Doolittle, and Spatz flew in and out of there when they were testing air-to-air refueling. That was one of the pastimes that I had when I was a kid. After graduation, I looked for a job almost every day, and I couldn't find one because of the Depression. And I finally took a job working on a farm, $75 a month, room and board, and I was able to make enough money to start to college at Ohio University.
That boy had been mesmerized by model airplanes driven by rubber band engines. He rode his bike to the levees along the greater Miami and Stillwater rivers to watch the great Jimmy Doolittle and the other legendary Army pilots sanctify old McCook Field with their pioneering test flights. That young man caught a break.
I had heard about the civilian pilot training program, and I applied for it and was accepted. And I took my flying lessons there at the Vandalia Airport. And after I got my private's license, I applied for the Army training or the Navy training. And as a matter of fact, to get into the program, you had to sign a commitment paper that if there was any kind of a emergency nationwide while you had to make yourself available.
The Civilian Pilot Training Program, CPTP, was a training program sponsored by the U.S. government. Its purpose was to increase the number of civilian pilots. It also focused on military preparedness. The program started in 1939. The government paid for a 72-hour ground school course, followed by 35 to 50 hours of flight instructions at facilities located near 11 colleges and universities. The CPTP was a fabulous success. Eventually, it operated at 1,132 colleges and universities and 1,460 flight schools. Nearly 12 million flying hours were recorded. The program trained 435,165 pilots between 1939 and 1944. Dick Cole was one of them.
I waited a while and finally got a little impatient and went down to Fort Thomas and enlisted in the Army and got sent to Randolph Field in San Antonio. After that training, I went to transferred over to Kelly and graduated from Kelly in July 1941. My first station was the 17th Bomb Group at Pendleton, Oregon. We were given what they used to call an open post, where you get like a 3-day pass. Everybody went to Hollywood, and we were in Hollywood at the time the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. Getting the notice that that had taken place, we immediately reported back to March Field.
2 months later, in February, the B-25 equipped 17th Bombardment Group was reassigned to Columbia Army Air Base in South Carolina.
The base wasn't complete yet. We lived in tents, and we were doing training missions because the word was that we were going to go from there to Africa. A short time after we were there, the word was put out that they were looking for crews to go on a dangerous mission.
Immediately following the attack on the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, President Franklin D. Roosevelt began pressing his military leadership for a plan to conduct a retaliatory airstrike against the Japanese home islands. With no Allied air base within striking distance of Japan, a naval officer, Captain Francis Lowe, proposed the idea of putting bombers on an aircraft carrier and transporting them to within striking distance by sea. Captain Lowe called it a case of, quote, fortuitous association. In fact, it became the basis for the Doolittle raid on Tokyo. Once it was determined that the B-25 would be the airplane used for the raid, the call for volunteers went out to U.S. Army Air Force's most qualified B-25 group, the 17th Bomb Group.
I put my name on the list that was in front of the squadron ops. On the way to Columbia, I had received my upgrade to first pilot, and the pilot that upgraded me came around and wanted to know if we could go together as a crew. I don't know how we were picked, but we ended up being one of the crews that was sent to Eglin Field, Florida, to train for this mission.
Plan the mission and train the crews, Chief of Staff of the Army Air Forces Henry Hap Arnold made a surprise choice. He turned to a man who had resigned his Army Air Corps commission to go into private business. Well, Arnold chose one of America's most famous aviators, James H. Doolittle, the same aviator young Dick Cole had spent hours watching from atop the levee overlooking McCook Army Airfield back in Dayton. And it gets better.
Midway through our training, the pilot that we were with became ill and had to drop out. The crew and I talked it over. They diplomatically elected me to go and talk to the operations officer, like, you go, which I did. The operations officer was the Captain Ski Ork. He said, well, the old man is coming in this afternoon. I'll crew you up with him, and if you do okay, well, you got yourself a job. And it turned out to be Colonel Doolittle. Anyway, it was a very lucky break. The Navy sent Lieutenant Hank Miller from Pensacola to show us how to make carrier takeoffs. It ended up that we knew we were going to take off a carrier because we had to practice it taking off on a dry runway. As we qualified on the takeoffs, then we did training in long-range flight, like we flew from Florida to Houston, Texas, or to Miami at low level. The navigators got training in navigation. We did bombing missions. Just about covers what we did there.
The crews were not told the target of the top secret mission, the Japanese home islands, nor were they told the date.
That's one of the things that I think people should remember about Colonel Doolittle. He actually assumed command of the mission on the 17th of January. You know, they had already pre-selected the launch date of 19 April. And during that time, he had to plan the mission, get the troops, get the airplanes, get the supplies, get them trained, and so forth to meet that 19th of April deadline, which he did in a couple of days less than the 90 days. In addition to that, he flew the mission.
Things were moving fast for Richard E. Cole. He graduated from high school in 1934. He graduated from the U.S. Army Air Corps flight training in July of 1941. And though he didn't know it at the time, 2 months after the Pearl Harbor attack, February 1942, Cole was volunteering to fly the first retaliatory mission over Japan.
I don't know. I just kind of figure you're young and you're adventurous and you think you can do anything, and that was part of the game.
The plan for the Doolittle raid was to transport B-25 bombers and their crews aboard the Navy's brand new aircraft carrier, the USS Hornet. to within 400 miles of Japan. Launch and target 6 Japanese cities: Tokyo, Yokohama, Yokosuka, Nagoya, Kobe, and Osaka, then recover the planes and the men at an airfield near Chuchao in a sector of eastern China controlled by Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Chinese army. If the Navy could deliver the bombers within 450 miles of Japan, the mission would require them to cover approximately 1,900 miles in the air to make it all the way to China. Now that meant extending the standard 1,300-mile range of the B-25, flown by the Raiders, by some 800 miles. The B-25s had been stripped of all unnecessary weight, including armament, and fitted with auxiliary fuel tanks and bladders wherever they would fit in the airplane.
We got orders to leave England and fly to Alameda, California, which we did. We arrived at Alameda on the 1st of April in 1942. They loaded the airplanes on the carrier on the morning of April the 2nd. The Hornet set sail for the mission.
The Hornet would not sail toward enemy waters alone. 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers accompanied the Hornet. Their job was to protect the vulnerable and very valuable aircraft carrier. The task force also included an oiler. It's a floating gas station that would refuel the flotilla in mid-Pacific. On April 8th, the aircraft carrier Enterprise steamed out of Pearl Harbor to rendezvous with the Hornet and its escorts. Admiral William Bull Halsey commanded the Enterprise. Its airplanes would provide defensive cover for the combined task force as it moved toward Japan. The greatest danger to the mission would be early detection by the Japanese. In case they were spotted early, the plan, and Dick Cole and the rest all knew it, would be to complete the bombing mission as long as the B-25s could make it to the targets in Japan. If they had no fuel left to escape enemy airspace after bombing, well, so be it.
Well, one of the things that I think about is that I don't think that the raid should be singled out, because somewhere along the line they interject the thing that it was a suicide mission. I don't think it was any more of a suicide mission than the guys taking off from England going over to Germany, or the guys in Africa going up over Italy, or the AVG guys taking off fighting the Japanese over there. It was just signs of the times, and that's the way it had to be. And that's the way it was, and that's the way it was accepted.
In fact, the carrier convoy was spotted early by a Japanese picket boat named the Nita Maru. Though the destroyer Nashville sank the Japanese boat, a message had already been sent informing the Imperial Command of the fleet's presence. There was no choice but to launch early.
Having to launch early right away our fuel became a problem. We launched at about 8:20 in the morning. It put us over Tokyo at right around noon. We shored into Japan about 20 miles north. We could see Tokyo Bay, and we turned south and took us on a course over Tokyo, east of the Imperial Palace. We flew low level till Fred Bramer recognized from photographs that they had given us on the carrier. At that time, Colonel Doolittle pulled up to 1,500 feet, and we dropped our incendiary bomb, and immediately went back down on the deck.
By the time they reached Yakushima off Japan's southwestern coast, visibility was down to 600 feet. The bad news was night was falling, and they were in a serious storm. The good news was the headwind was now a 25-mile-per-hour tailwind. It just might provide enough push to get them to the China coast in spite of the expected fuel shortage. The 15 airplanes that made it all the way to China had no chance to land safely. They had been flying more than 13 hours, and night had fallen. A homing beacon they had counted on at the airfield near Chuchao never transmitted. The airplane carrying it had crashed en route to the field. The B-25s were enveloped in a torrential storm. Finally, the Chinese, fearing they were Japanese airplanes, had blacked out all lights. As their fuel ran out, there was nothing to do but ditch or bail out.
For me, the most scared and worrisome and whatever other adjective you want to use of the whole mission was standing in the airplane looking down at that black hole, because we ejected the hatch, and outside there was a lot of wind, rain, and lightning, and you were going to have to go through that hole into a foreign country, not having any idea where you were or anything about it. So maybe that was the scariest time. But drop down, or the descension, was a lot of lightning and wind and rain. And the worst part was that you had no idea when you were going to hit the ground. I was fortunate that my chute drifted over a pine tree, and I ended up about 12 feet off of the ground. So it was like jumping in a feather bed. It was raining very hard, so I pulled part of the chute in and made kind of a hammock affair and spent the night at a tree. When daybreak came, I had a compass and started walking west. And at dusk, I came out on a cliff. And down below, I saw a little cantonment of a couple of buildings that had a Chinese nationalist flag flying up above it. And the only reason I knew it was a Chinese nationalist flag was that the same emblem was painted on the AVG P-40s that I had read about before. Anyway, I walked down there and I was accosted by a young lad, and he took me to a building that was empty except for a table. On the table was a sketch of on a piece of paper of a two-tailed airplane with 5 parachutes coming out of it. So I finally got him to take me where he took whoever drew the sketch. I walked into this building and it was Colonel Doolittle. He is the one who had drawn the sketch. I said, boy, am I glad to see you.
69 of the 80 Doolittle raiders who left the Hornet escaped capture or death. 3 were killed in action as a result of the loss of their aircraft. 8 were captured by the Japanese. 3 of the POWs were summarily executed. A 4th died in captivity. The remaining 4 were repatriated at the end of the war. For the mission, all 80 Doolittle raiders received the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Chinese government also decorated all of the raiders. Those imprisoned and tortured also received the Purple Heart. 2 raiders were given the Silver Star, and James H. Doolittle was awarded the Medal of Honor. In his autobiography, Admiral Halsey wrote, quote, "Here let me say that in my opinion, their flight was one of the most courageous deeds in all military history." What a privilege and honor it is to be a part of this evening. It's hard to describe the feeling. That's it on the video. Now direct your attention to the screens, and that'll be your ears too. Our hope is that right now they're supposed to be starting up the B-25s. So enjoy that show in the air and make it a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
He did. He did. 6.8. 6.8. Oh, 1/16. Yeah.
But you just can't stand still for 10 seconds.
Yeah, you want.